Are banksters setting up a massive raid? The total Comex open interest is back above the 500,000 level, and if recent history is any guide, that's not a good sign. Submitted by Craig HEMKE of TF Metals. Gold prices remain firm today with the exception of the $5 drop at the London PM fix, and they remain at a critical juncture. Price needs to extend higher here, but total Comex open interest is back above the 500,000 level, and if recent history is any guide, that's not a good sign. Let's start with the open interest numbers for yesterday, as they were exactly as expected on the $19 price surge. You knew that the banks were in there desperately attempting to keep things in check. To that end, the criminals issued another 13,553 contracts of Comex gold yesterday. Again, these contracts represent an additional 1,355,300 troy ounces of paper metal and a failure and a future intent to deliver over 42 metric tons of gold. However, no additional gold collateral was deposited and no delivery is ever intended. Instead, the criminal banks issued this new paper in order to meet new speculator demand and thereby manage the price from making fresh highs above 1264 and preserving their carefully painted head and shoulder top. So what happens next? Well, it looks like price wants to break higher, and I want the price to break higher, but we have recent history working against us. Check this out. March 10th, open interest 504,418. Next day drop $14. March 17th, 508,262. Next day drop $11. March 22nd, 510,579. Next day drop $25. April 12th, 504,523. Next day drop $13. April 19th, open interest 503,331. Next day drop, so far so good. So we'll see. Like we've been saying, we need even more spec fiat to flow into paper gold. This would force the banks to take open interest up to 550,000 and price would likely move to new highs near or above 1300. Now what could, can, might entice new specs into the Comex to make this happen? Maybe the next set of FOMC Fed lines next week on the 27th. Maybe the release of the first guesstimate of Q1 GDP the next day. Maybe more crazy fun out of Shanghai. I don't know, but we need some kind of catalyst. Otherwise, the banks will just overtly raid the price again, forcing the speculators back out and dropping open interest back towards 480,000. Silver saw an open interest increase yesterday too, but not much when you consider that price was up over 4%. Total Comex open interest rose by 945 contracts to 194,510. Don't misunderstand though, this is still an extraordinarily high amount of open interest. The all-time high in Comex open interest was set last June 23rd at 200,273, and less than 2 weeks ago we were at 175,000. However, if you really want to get frustrated and angry, consider this. Every Comex contract represents an opportunity to buy or deliver 5,000 troy ounces of silver. Therefore, when we do the math, 194,510 contracts times 5,000 ounces a contract, we get a total Comex obligation of 972,555,000 ounces of silver. And here's your trivia question of the day. How much silver does the world produce every year? about 870 million ounces. So the Comex silver open interest represents at 112% of total mine supply. How does that compare to gold? Well, the world is projected to mine about 3,000 metric tons this year, or about 96 million ounces of gold, with each COMEX contract representing 100 ounces. Total open interest of 503,331 contracts equals 50,333,100 ounces, or about 52% of total mine supply. And what about platinum? A COMEX contract represents 50 ounces of platinum, and there are currently 60,387 of them floating around. This represents 3,019,350 ounces of paper platinum. And how much platinum does the world mine every year? About 170 metric tons, or 5.7 million ounces. So here's the so here the COMEX also trades about 52% of mine supply. Lastly, just for fun, you might consider the total COMEX copper open interest is 201,891 contracts. Each contract represents 25,000 pounds of copper. This year yields a total of just over 5 billion pounds of copper. That may sound like a lot until you consider that the world produces about 41 billion pounds annually. So the COMEX copper open interest represents about 12% of total mine supply. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Do you see a little bit of disparity here? What would be the paper price of silver if open interest was cut in half to the level of gold and platinum? What would be the paper price if open interest was reduced by 90% to the relative level of copper? And you wonder why I call the bankers criminals and thieves, and why I call the COMEX a den of vipers, while using these terms fraud, scam, and sham. So anyways, before I start getting angry, I think I'll just give you a couple of charts and then close out this post. Here are the gold and silver again. Gold needs to move through 1264 to ease some of my concerns. Provided gold holds there in the short term, I still think silver charges through 1720 and heads to 1770. As I close, I see we're at 1258 and 1720. More later, TURD Ferguson. Take care. Keep stacking.